Hello, and welcome to Tech Latest from Nikkei Asia, where we bring you the freshest updates from the technology sector in Asia. I'm your host, Akito Tanaka from Nikkei Asia's Tokyo headquarters, and Cissy Zhou, a Nikkei Asia staff writer based in Hong Kong, will join me for this week's episode. We'll discuss the latest Chinese e-commerce trend, or maybe I should say trouble, and also the Chinese AI giant's chip strategy. Welcome to this week's episode, Cissy. It's great to have you here.
Hi, Akito. Thanks for having me today.
So, in Nikkei Asia's weekly Tech Asia feature story, you wrote about the Chinese e-commerce industry's pushback on non-return refunds. Now, what are these non-return refunds and how does it work?
So, non-return refunds means you get a full refund, but you can keep the item. And in some circumstances, it could be due to the shipping fee, particularly for some small value items, as the shipping fee could be higher than the item itself. So, to reduce the cost, the seller may just let the buyer keep the item. The practice was not invented by Chinese e-commerce platform actually, but I would say that some Chinese companies have taken it to the next level because buyers can get a refund without return with few conditions sometimes in China. And in China, it was started by bargain platform Pinduoduo in 2021. And then the practice was followed by all the major rivals, including Alibaba's Taobao and Tmall, JD.com, and short video platform Douyin late last year, thus becoming an industry trend. But other companies were kind of forced to follow Pinduoduo's practice because Pinduoduo had been aggressively taking buyers away from its rivals due to its serious policies that center around buyer-first strategy.
I see. So shoppers can order something, they buy stuff from these online platforms. If they wanted to refund, you can keep the product, but you can still get the money back is the idea.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that sounds like a very generous bargain from a consumer's perspective. But how did it pay off for all these Chinese e-commerce companies?
Yeah, honestly, I don't think that the policy is really paying off. But in terms of GMV, the gross merchandise value, it might be helpful because GMV doesn't include returns. But in practice, sellers told me that this policy has greatly harmed their profit because buyers are abusing the policy and just getting freebies at the cost of sellers. And in some extreme examples, I can give you some. So there are even groups on social media teaching individuals how to game the system for a fee ranging from $4 to $40. And after you pay that amount of money, the groups will provide tips such as how to file a complaint against sellers and how to react to hotline services inspection calls. And due to the big losses, some sellers have even been forced to close their shops. And following the losses, some sellers on Pinduoduo started to stage protests against the company. And some sellers also started to sue buyers for unreasonable refunds. And we can also see from the public records that last year, the number of lawsuits over returnless refunds peaked at over 250.
Wow. So it sounds like it's harming the platformers. It's also harming the sellers that sell stuffs on these platforms. And how are these e-commerce companies reacting or trying to fix this problem?
Yes. Some of the platforms are tightening terms and conditions, actually. For example, Taobao amended its policy in August to allow merchants with high score review ratings more room to negotiate with the buyers. And then last week, Taobao also announced that it had intercepted over 400,000 unreasonable refund-only transactions per day since August. And that number is very striking, actually, because it really gives you a sense of how rampant the refund-only phenomenon in China is. And if the unreasonable returnless refunds stood at 400,000 per day, you can imagine how many reasonable cases are there, right? And let alone, it is commonly understood that refund-only rate with Pinduoduo is much higher than that with Taobao.
I see. And you touched this earlier in this conversation, but your story mentions that companies like Amazon and other US online retailer service adopt a similar refund only policy. But why has this become such a big issue? I wouldn't say only in China, but why is it a big issue in China and we don't really hear this in like US or Japan or elsewhere?
Yeah, that is a very interesting question. I think, first of all, that is because e-commerce competition is especially fierce in China. And in some circumstances, platforms are competing to please the buyers because the Chinese economy is really slowing down and consumption is pretty weak. So those platforms need to keep people to stay with them and keep buying. So offering quick full refund without return is one of the ways to keep the customers.
What is most likely to happen in the near future, do you think, Sissy? Will these online retailers give up on non return policies, or what's likely to happen?
I think the general trend is that it might get tightened due to pressure from both sellers and the authorities. Um, as we can see, that Beijing is already calling for companies to stop the malicious competition. Um, if the platforms don't take any action and once sellers keep protesting, that would be crossing Beijing's red line because social stability is one of the most important things to the CCP, right? So what we have seen so far is that even Pinduoduo is making some gestures to tighten the policy. It has issued a letter to its sellers recently and highlighting the key strategies to enhance the effectiveness of after-sales appeals by the sellers. And other platforms are also stepping up human intervention in those disputes instead of AI. However, I don't think platforms will completely give up on this non-return refund policy because there are indeed shabby products. And in short, I think the platforms will struggle to keep a balance between sellers and buyers.
I see. Great. Thank you very much. Now, on to our next topic of this episode. Cissy, you interviewed the vice president of SenseTime's Asia Pacific operation. Now, first of all, what does SenseTime do and how is it important to the Chinese tech industry?
SenseTime is one of China's star AI companies. The company was founded 10 years ago and it is very well known for its facial recognition technology. And because of that, since 2019, SenseTime has been repeatedly sanctioned by the US due to allegations that the company's facial recognition technology has been deployed in the surveillance and internment of the Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities in China. And besides facial recognition, the company also engages in image, object and text recognition, medical image and video analysis, remote sensing, and autonomous driving systems. Currently, the company is also very active in those, all those smart city projects in Asia as well as in Middle East.
So, SenseTime is the AI giant in China, and we know that AI companies need many AI chips to process huge amounts of data. In SenseTime case, this may be facial image data, and global AI companies are buying massive amounts of these chips from NVIDIA, which is based in Silicon Valley, and actually makes the most powerful AI chips. Now, your article says that SenseTime is taking a different approach for chip procurement. What is this approach, and why are they taking this approach?
Because the US has put NVIDIA's AI chips, such as H100, under export controls to curb China's progress in AI. On the other hand, our sources also told us that the Chinese government is telling companies to use more homegrown chips, although in reality, NVIDIA still remains the top choice. And according to research by Bernstein, Huawei currently accounts for around 10% of the Chinese chip market, and NVIDIA dominates with nearly 90%.
Great, thank you. And this is going to be really interesting. So the SenseTime and the Chinese AI companies are actually using made in China chips to process their data. Now, what are these companies saying about the performance of these made in China chips compared to NVIDIA chips that the Western or the global AI companies use? What are the performance differences?
Yeah. So the senior executive from SenseTime, as well as another senior executive from Tencent last year, told me that there are still some gaps between the domestic chips and foreign ones in terms of training, which has higher requirement for chips. But in the field of inference chips, the performance of Chinese products is getting much closer to that of foreign ones. And he also spoke very highly of Huawei's latest AI accelerator, the Ascend 910C. And he said that chip offers a significant performance improvement.
Interesting. Now, does this mean that Chinese AI companies like SenseTime and other tech companies could keep a pace with global tech companies without using US chips?
So after the US start to restrict high-end chip exports to China, NVIDIA has introduced less powerful chips specifically for the Chinese market. And meanwhile, some Chinese companies such as Alibaba have redesigned their products to make them less powerful in order to continue working with global manufacturers such as TSMC. And with, as we all know, that Huawei is investing heavily to catch up with the US. However, a chip analyst from Bank of America told me that to manufacture high-end AI chips, companies first need to be able to design them. But that part nowadays is ironically more based on AI service itself. Then they would need EUV tools, which print intricate patterns onto semiconductor materials. And then after those two steps, they would need advanced 3D or 2.5D packaging solution to actually produce those chips. So back to your question, it would be very difficult to see how any country looking to be independent from US technology can be successful.
Right. Thank you, Cissy. Thank you for joining this episode of Tech Latest. And thank you for your great reporting and your stories. Thank you. That's all for this week's episode. You can read more of Cissy's reporting, along with other stories about Asia's tech industry on Nikkei Asia's website, asia.nikkei.com. You can also subscribe to our weekly Tech Asia newsletter, which will be delivered to your inbox every Thursday. Lastly, if you enjoy this podcast and want to support us, please give us a follow on whatever podcast platform you use. Thanks again for listening. Check back in next time for more updates on the tech trends that matter.